She stares at the computer screen in absolute horror as a distorted voice begins to mock her, utilizing highly advanced artificial intelligence to generate realistic video messages from the dead. One by one, the faces of her past tormentors flash before her eyes, building up to a chilling video of her late friend, Dewey. Suddenly, she spins around to find herself trapped, confronted face to face by a neighbor she trusted entirely, who has been pulling the strings all along, realizing that her desperate attempt to shield her family from a recurring nightmare has failed completely. Her name is Sidney Prescott. Years ago, she was the ultimate survivor of the infamous massacres in Woodsboro, California. After enduring multiple generations of copycat serial killers, she did everything in her power to permanently leave that dark history behind. She changed her location, married a dedicated police officer named Mark Evans, and focused entirely on raising her teenage daughter, Tatum. Sidney desperately hoped that by burying her past and refusing to engage with the media, the curse of Ghostface would never find her family. Unfortunately, she is about to learn that nostalgia is the most dangerous weapon of all. The terror reignites in Woodsboro, where an excited horror enthusiast named Scott and his uneasy girlfriend, Madison, check into a highly unusual vacation rental. The property is the actual former home of the notorious Stu Macker, which has recently been converted into a specialized Ghostface-themed Airbnb. The entire layout is meticulously designed around the historical slasher sprees committed by Stu and Billy Loomis, as well as the later massacres orchestrated by Amber Freeman and Richie Kirsch. While Scott is completely mesmerized by the macabre atmosphere, Madison is instantly gripped by a deep sense of dread, which is heightened by the disturbing artwork and eerie decorations filling the corridors. Moments later, Madison steps out of the restroom and realizes Scott has vanished. Growing increasingly panicked, she wanders through the dim flat until she comes face to face with a masked figure holding a razor-sharp knife. Terrified, she bolts toward the front door, slamming directly into Scott and screaming that a killer is inside. Instead of fleeing, Scott laughs it off and investigates, discovering that the figure is merely a motion-activated, life-sized animatronic designed to jump-scare the guests. Scott finds the elaborate setup fascinating, openly admitting his long-standing intrigue regarding Stu's role in the original killings. Madison remains completely unamused, especially when Scott suggests a popular conspiracy theory that Stu might actually still be alive. Suddenly, the landline rings. The property host is on the other end, immediately launching into a twisted game of horror movie trivia in classic Ghostface tradition. Scott confidently takes the lead, believing his vast cinematic knowledge will save them. The rules are simple. Answer 3 trivia questions correctly to survive, but make a single mistake and face fatal consequences. Scott successfully answers the first 2 questions, but the caller coldly informs him that his final response is incorrect. Just before panic sets in, Madison interjects with the correct answer, temporarily defusing the threat. Shortly after, Madison's personal phone rings, and a disguised voice explicitly threatens her life. Assuming Scott is playing a cruel joke, she brushes it off and approaches the animatronic display once more. But just as she relaxes, a second ghost face materializes directly behind her. Reacting on pure instinct, Madison throws a punch, only to realize she has struck Scott, who had put on a replica costume to scare her. The playful moment turns deadly when Scott notices the figure behind Madison is moving with organic fluidity. Before they can react, the genuine killer emerges from the shadows. In a flash of violence, Ghostface lunges forward, driving a blade into Scott's chest twice before jamming the knife into his skull. Hysterical with fear, Madison flees up the stairs with the killer hot on her heels. Following a desperate physical struggle on the balcony ledge, she manages to shove the assailant over the railing. But as she clings to the overhead chandelier to avoid a fatal drop, her grip slips, and she plummets directly onto the killer's upturned blade. With both victims neutralized, Ghostface douses the entire house in gasoline and sets it ablaze, erasing the crime scene in a raging inferno. Meanwhile, in the quiet town of Pine Grove, Indiana, Tatum Evans enjoys a quiet moment with her boyfriend, Ben Brown. Their quality time is abruptly interrupted by Sidney Prescott, who fiercely orders Ben to leave the house. Haunted by her own history, Sidney struggles to trust anyone around her daughter. After returning to her bedroom, it becomes clear just how hard Sidney has worked to build a peaceful life alongside Tatum and her husband, Officer Mark Evans. The following morning, Mark prepares for his shift while Tatum gets ready for school. As Tatum heads for the door, Sidney spots the jacket her daughter plans to wear and immediately demands she take it off, visibly unsettled by its appearance. After a protective beat of hesitation, Sidney forces herself to calm down and allows Tatum to keep it, fighting hard not to let her deep-rooted paranoia dictate their daily lives. Tatum subsequently leaves for school alongside her closest friends, Chloe Parker and Hannah Thurman, and the trio is picked up by Ben. Later that afternoon, Sidney manages a local coffee shop where she works. During her shift, her neighbor, Jessica Bowden, drops by with her young son, Lucas. Things quickly become uncomfortable when Lucas reveals an intense curiosity about Sidney's history, asking to interview her about serial killers. While Lucas steps aside, a remorseful Jessica apologizes for her son's lack of boundaries. During their conversation, Sidney admits her growing anxiety over Tatum's emerging curiosity regarding her past, a trauma she is nowhere near ready to revisit. Jessica offers a sobering perspective, suggesting that overprotecting children can leave them highly vulnerable, and that understanding real-world dangers might one day serve as their ultimate shield. Back at the high school, Tatum participates in a theater rehearsal for an upcoming play. Her acting is harshly condemned by the drama instructor, Mr. Willis, who complains that her performance lacks any real enthusiasm, despite her playing a minor background role. He goes a step further by unfairly comparing her to her famous mother, demanding she channel the legendary intensity Sidney is known for, which leaves Tatum deeply humiliated and frustrated. Later, Tatum shares a vulnerable moment with Ben, asking for his genuine perception of her. Ben responds with heartfelt reassurance, validating her worth and giving her a much-needed confidence boost. Back at the cafe, the fragile peace is permanently shattered when Sidney receives a terrifying phone call. Initially, she maintains her composure, having conquered these exact psychological games before. However, the situation turns deeply surreal when the caller forces a live video connection, revealing a heavily scarred, older individual claiming to be Stu Macker, somehow alive after all these years. To prove the threat is immediate, the man pans his camera to show he is standing directly outside Tatum's high school theater building. Terrified for her daughter's safety, Sidney urgently contacts Mark and races toward the campus. Inside the school theater, Hannah is suspended high above the stage in a harness for the play's aerial effects. Unbeknownst to anyone, the killer slips into the building. Sneaking into the backstage area, the predator ambushes a technician named Aaron, silently executing him before an alarm can be raised. The killer then turns their attention to Hannah, using the stage ropes and rigging to violently manipulate her like a puppet as she swings helplessly in midair. The attacker sadistically torments her before launching a final, fatal assault that leaves the theater in complete disarray. By the time Sidney arrives, she is met with a devastating crime scene. Spotting the masked figure, she draws her weapon and fires, but the culprit manages to slip away into the shadows before the perimeter can be cordoned off. In the aftermath, the police question Tatum and her friends, who are entirely traumatized by the violent loss of Hannah. Mark pulls Sidney aside, promising they will track down the mastermind, adding that cyber units are analyzing the video call to determine if the caller was truly Stu or merely someone utilizing sophisticated deepfake technology. Recognizing that their current location is no longer safe, Sidney rushes home to pack her family's bags. At that exact moment, the killer ambushes them, having secretly infiltrated the house through the attic space. Before Sidney or Mark can draw a weapon, the assailant grabs Tatum at knife point, resulting in a tense standoff. Mark attempts to charge the attacker but is violently hurled down the staircase, knocking him unconscious. Thinking on her feet, Sidney drags Tatum into a concealed panic room, navigating her through a hidden passageway behind the walls to smuggle her out of the house. Realizing their escape route, the killer begins blindly driving the blade through the drywall. During the frantic struggle, Sidney manages to break the assailant's weapon, forcing a brief retreat. The conflict spills out onto the suburban street, where a bruised Sidney and Mark continue to fight back. Suddenly, a speeding van careens into the street and strikes Ghostface. Gail Weather steps out of the vehicle alongside her two new media interns, Chad and Mindy. This marks the first time Sidney and Gail have reunited since Sidney chose to sit out the recent string of massacres in New York. The reunion is cut short as they approach the unmasked, unconscious attacker on the asphalt. To their shock, the killer is revealed to be Carl Allen Gibbs, the highly unsettling stranger Sidney had noticed loitering at the coffee shop earlier that day. The discovery leaves the authorities baffled, as no one can figure out his connection to Sidney, or why he orchestrated such an elaborate plot using Stu's identity to lure her out. As the official investigation launches, Sidney and Gail discover that Gibbs had recently escaped from Fallbrook Psychiatric Hospital. Sidney's paranoia intensifies, knowing from experience that these copycat killers never operate alone. While discussing the case indoors, Sidney's phone rings. The voice on the other end claims to be Stu once again, mocking Gail for losing her prominent media position before issuing a chilling joint death threat. Seeking answers, Sidney and Gail drive to the Fallbrook facility, where they speak with a staff orderly named Marco. Upon being shown a photograph of Stu, Marco recognizes him immediately, identifying him as a patient booked under the alias John Doe. Marco explains that the man suffered from profound amnesia following a catastrophic head injury years ago, adding that he was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial and had been legally released from the asylum just 2 weeks prior. Most alarmingly, Marco notes that during their confinement, John Doe and Carl Gibbs had formed an inseparable, highly dangerous bond. In a calculated move to draw the remaining killer into a trap, Sidney agrees to a live, televised broadcast hosted by Gail. Meanwhile, back at the Evans residence, Mark is left completely unprotected. Hearing an anomaly in the house, he goes to investigate, only to be ambushed by the second masked figure. The assailant wraps him in plastic sheeting and stabs him repeatedly while he is incapacitated. Across town, the community is placed under a strict curfew as panic mounts. Tatum meets up with Chad and Mindy at the local tavern where Chloe works. With hysteria rising, Mindy shares her meta-theory on the unfolding events, arguing that the killer is weaponizing nostalgia to break Sidney's spirit. She casts suspicion on Lucas due to his erratic behavior, while pointing out that Ben possesses the technical computer skills required to forge a convincing deepfake of Stu. Basically, everyone is a suspect. Meanwhile, Sidney takes her seat for the live broadcast as Tatum and her friends watch the feed from the bar. The interview takes a disastrous turn when Gale blindly brings up Sidney's other children, who are currently hidden away with Mark's mother. Furious at the breach of privacy, Sidney cuts the cameras and storms off. At that exact moment, the killer calls her phone, bragging that he is standing directly outside the tavern where Tatum is located. Panicked, Sidney races toward the venue. At the bar, Ben insists on driving Tatum home for her safety. Once inside his vehicle, Tatum accidentally discovers a video file on his laptop containing a deepfake model of Stu. Ben frantically explains that he merely constructed the digital filter to test whether someone could easily replicate the footage terrorizing her mother. Refusing to believe him, Tatum knocks him unconscious and runs back toward the building. Unfortunately, a masked killer intercepts her, forcing her to run for her life into the dark streets. Inside the tavern's kitchen, Chloe is violently ambushed. Attempting to defend herself with a stray implement, she accidentally slices Chad in the shoulder. The killer swiftly turns on Mindy, slashing her across the abdomen, but inexplicably spares the twins for the moment to pursue Chloe. Lucas attempts to intervene but is easily overpowered. The killer brutally executes Chloe by dragging her across the bar top through shattered glass before inflicting a fatal wound with a broken shard. Turning back to a struggling Lucas, the murderer forcefully impaling his skull onto the bar's metal tap handle. Tatum continues to navigate the deserted streets under the city-wide curfew. Ben recovers and catches up to her on foot, and a remorseful Tatum apologizes for doubting his intentions. Before they can reconcile, the killer emerges from the darkness and fatally stabs Ben. Barely processing the shock, Tatum flees to Sidney's coffee shop and contacts her mother over the phone. Sidney instructs her to head into the back office, revealing there is a firearm hidden in the safe. Utilizing the shop's closed-circuit security monitors, Sidney tracks the killer's movements and directs Tatum to blind fire through the interior walls, successfully clipping the intruder. However, when Tatum steps outside to inspect the downed attacker, she is ambushed. Sidney can only watch her monitors in absolute horror as a second masked assailant appears from the shadows to help abduct her daughter. Upon reaching her office, Sidney receives a final phone call ordering her to return to her family home if she ever wants to see her daughter alive again. When Sidney arrives at the dark house, she uncovers the horrifying truth. The perpetrators have been utilizing artificial intelligence to generate deepfake videos of Stu, along with past historical killers like Nancy Loomis, Roman Bridger, and even her late friend Dewey, purely to break her spirit. She is then confronted by the first killer, who unmasks as Marco, the asylum orderly, holding Tatum at knife point. In a shocking twist, the second masked pocket drags out Mark, who is severely wounded but still alive. Marco's accomplice unmasks to reveal Jessica Bowden. Jessica confesses that reading Sidney's published memoirs inspired her to stop being a victim, driving her to murder her own abusive husband. However, she felt deeply slighted when Sidney chose to ignore the recent slasher spree in New York, and orchestrated this entire nightmare to force her back into the spotlight. In a chilling final admission, Jessica reveals she also murdered her own son Lucas, because he was beginning to display the exact same toxic behavioral traits as his late father. In the high-stakes distraction, Mark musters his remaining strength to break Tatum free, giving her a chance to fight back. Simultaneously, Sidney blindsides Marco, neutralizing him in a swift, violent countermove. The confrontation escalates into a brutal knockdown drag-out brawl between Sidney and Jessica. Just as Jessica gains the upper hand, Tatum intervenes, firing her weapon directly into the psycho mom. Jessica is thrown back but defiantly rises for a final strike. Sidney and Tatum open fire together, repeatedly pumping rounds into the villain until her face is completely obliterated. In the aftermath of the bloodbath, paramedics rush Mark to the intensive care unit. Gale arrives alongside a heavily bandaged Chad and Mindy, who miraculously survived their wounds. Gale shares a deeply emotional, tearful reconciliation with Sidney, offering a sincere apology for her past exploitative media coverage. With the nightmare finally concluded, the story of the film comes to an end.